Nulldrifters? Nethergoyfs? Winter moons? It must be Modern Horizons 3 spoiler time. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for a super early, very surprising daily dose of Modern Horizons 3 spoilers. So Modern Horizons 3 is a set I've been waiting for. It is my big set of the year. I love, and also kind of hate, but mostly love Modern Horizons. It has so many cool designs, so many sweet cards. So we weren't supposed to kick off spoiler season for Modern Horizons 3 for 3 more weeks. May 21st is the official start date. But over the last week, a bunch of cards leaked, and Wizards actually posted an article and confirmed the leaks and actually posted the cards officially, which means we get to talk about all the leaked cards and a bunch of other cards that Wizards just spoiled as a bonus. So we have a ton of super cool Modern Horizons 3 cards to talk about today, which means we should probably get right into it, start talking super spicy new Magic cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, to keep up on all the latest spoilers throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGPreviews.com. And second, if you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Anyway, let's talk Modern Horizons 3. First up today, we got a super scary new free counter spell in Flare of Denial. So Flare of Denial, 3 mana, blue instant, counter target spell, but you can sack a non-token blue creature rather than pay the spell's mana cost. So this is a card I've been thinking about a lot, and I'm trying to decide, is this card horrible? Is it busted? On one hand, free counters have a pretty long history of being absurdly powerful. On the other hand, if you compare this to our past free spell cycles in Horizon sets, I think this is the safest of the bunch. Think about original Modern Horizons. We had the Force cycle, format defining cards. Then we had Modern Horizons 2 with the Evoke Elementals, format breaking cards. But both of those cycles, all you needed to do to cast them for free was exile a card of the right color from your hand. Flare Denial has like multiple additional restrictions. Not only do you need a permanent on the battlefield, but it specifically has to be a creature, which means unlike Force Negation or Solitude, which you can kind of play in any deck of its colors, like as long as you have a decent number of blue cards, Force Negation's fine. As long as you got a decent number of white cards, Solitude is fine. Flare Denial, not only do you need a decent amount of cards in the right color, but they specifically need to be cheap creatures of that color. So I think it's certainly safer than past free spells. Is it safe though? That's where I'm not really sure, because if you think about the power of free counter spells, Force of Will, the best card in Legacy, CDH staple, Pact of Negation, CDH staple, Combo Protection, Force Negation, a format defining card in Modern, Fierce Guardianship, a format defining card in Commander. Almost all of them are kind of broken. So I think that Flare of Denial certainly has potential to be super strong, even though it has that big restriction. So one of the things I do like about Flare Denial is it's a little bit like Force Negation in the sense that if you do have to hardcast it, it's not the end of the world. Like, you're getting a literal cancel. 3 mana counter target spell. Obviously, you wouldn't put cancel in your Modern deck. You'd play counter spell instead. So essentially, you're paying 1 additional mana. But still, it's not like Force of Will or something, which costs 5 mana to hardcast. So hardcasting, it's not the end of the world. Ideally, you'll be, casting it for free when you need to. But if you gotta pay 3 and counter or something, whatever, I can get away with that. So the question is, where does this card work? Because like we talked about, it's not a card that you can just put in any deck. It needs specifically cheap blue creatures in your deck. So I think Snapcaster is one of the cutest synergies. You can like Flare Denial something and then Snapcaster to flash it back and sack the Snapcaster to the Flare Denial. So maybe we'll see a comeback of Snapcaster control, although you probably need more than just Snapcaster to make this card work. As far as existing tier decks that could play Flare of Denial, the most obvious is probably Merfolk. Like, Merfolk has a lot of cheap blue creatures, so it's always going to be able to turn this on. They don't really want to sack their cheap blue creatures, but if your opponent's about to win the game with the combo or like wrath your board, sacking 1 Merfolk is better than losing the game or losing all your Merfolk. Phelia Archaeologist shows up in quite a few decks that can mill Flare Denial and then you can sacrifice it later. Maybe Shardless Agent Cascade style decks. Like, it's expensive enough that it doesn't ruin your Cascade, plus you can sack your Shardless Agent to counter things. So there are some possibilities. Maybe a more likely possibility though is we're gonna see decks built around this card. Like, it works so well in fairies. Fairies have all these cheap blue creatures. It wants to be countering stuff, so you can play your Sleep Curse fairies and all these cheap fairies, and when you need to, you can sacrifice one of them to Flare Denial. Works well with spirits. Spirits have a lot of cheap blue creatures. Super cute with Spectral Sailor. You can like flash it in and then Flare Denial. So I think this might be kind of a build around card where I think we see decks like fairies and spirits get this big boost in power because Flare Denial is a really, really good card, just not every deck can take advantage of it. So I think this is a big reward for playing a deck that can take advantage of it. The other question I have for this card is if this can be the answer to Show and Tell in Timeless. So remember, this entire set's coming to Magic Arena. All the cards are going to be in Timeless. We really need an answer to Show and Tell. Flare of Denial might be it. I don't think Flare of Denial can go in the Show and Tell decks because I don't think they're going to have enough cheap blue creatures to make it work. But if you can build a deck with a bunch of cheap blue creatures, maybe some sort of fairy deck or Snapcaster deck, then you get this free counter that can be a really nice answer to Show and Tell. So worth keeping in mind, it might be possible to build a Flare of Denial deck that can be an answer to the current Show and Tell meta. So Flare Denial, I think the card's really strong. I like that it's a really strong card that doesn't go in every deck. I never want to say a free spell cycle is safe, but I think this is certainly safer in the safest looking free spell cycle that we've seen in a while. It could still end up being broken. Maybe we end up in a modern where everyone's playing blue 1-drops just to make this card work. But my guess is it's a really strong card that certainly sees play, but only specific decks can play it. And I think that's a good spot to put power in a set like Modern Horizons. Also, thanks to Wizards for putting this card at rare. After the Evoke Elementals were at Mythic and got so expensive and made Modern so expensive, it's nice to see the free spell cycle going back to rare this time around. We also got a card that might even be more busted. I'm actually like kind of surprised they even printed this card in Ugin's Labyrinth. So Ugin's Labyrinth, it's a land. When ATBs, you can exile a colorless card mana value 7 or greater from your hand, so probably like some big Eldrazi or something. Then it can tap to add a colorless mana, or if a card's exiled with it, you add 2 colorless mana instead, and then you can tap it to return the exiled card to its owner's hand. So similar to Flare Denial, this isn't a card that every deck can play. If you're playing some normal deck that's a bunch of cheap creatures, you're probably not going to be able to take advantage of this. On the other hand, if you can meet its requirement, this card is straight up busted. Lands that tap for 2 mana are incredibly strong. Like, look at Legacy, Ancient Tomb City of Traders, the foundation of that format, the best thing going at the moment, because making 2 mana with a single land is just kind of busted. Even think about Modern, Eldrazi Temple, Eye of Ugin were the foundation of the Eldrazi deck that broke the format a few years ago. And you might be thinking, well, yeah, but I gotta exile a card from my hand. Is it worth it? Well, let me show you Gemstone Caverns, which is currently heavily played in Modern, even though you gotta exile a card from your hand, because getting ahead in mana is just so powerful. So I think anytime you see a land that taps for 2 mana, you gotta take notice of it. Like if City of Traders, a land that has a drawback that when you play another land you gotta sacrifice it, is one of the best cards in Legacy, you gotta think that Ugin's Labyrinth can make it. So where can we play this card to harness its power? So the obvious home is like Eldrazi decks, Tron decks. We know Eldrazi are a big theme of Modern Horizons 3, so maybe they make a comeback, but in those decks, you play your Ugin's Labyrinth, exile an Emrakul or a Karn or an Ugin the Spirit Dragon, and then even better, after you do your early game stuff and ramp a bunch, you can always just tap your Ugin's Labyrinth to get back the card and then play it in the future, so you don't even lose that card forever. So it seems great in like Eldrazi Tron style decks, also seems really sneaky good in Affinity decks. So Affinity's been on the upswing in Modern, ever since Simulacrum Synthesizer released with Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and Affinity's already playing like Sojourner's Companion, Mirror Enforcer, these 7 mana Affinity creatures, and they work really well with Labyrinth. You can play Ugin's Labyrinth on turn 1, exile a Sojourner's Companion, turn 2 get down your Synthesizer, and then you just play your stuff, make big constructs, and if you need to, eventually you just tap your Labyrinth to get back your Sojourner's Companion, play it for free, make a huge construct, so seems great there as well. I also wonder if this card's so good that we're gonna see it show up in some weird places. Like, you can use Stoneforge Mystic to find Cauldron Complete, to exile Cauldron Complete, to Ugin's Labyrinth, to get a land that makes 2 mana. Is that going too far? Like, is that too many steps to make this work? It works really well with Emerge, another cost reduction mechanic, but Elder Deep Fiend, Distended Mindbender, works good with prototypes, like Skitterbeam Battalion. It's technically 9 mana, even though you can cast it for 5. So there's a bunch of potential homes for this card. One of my favorite sneaky plans, though, is Mascot Exhibition. So Mascot Exhibition, you probably remember remember this from Standard a couple years ago. It's one of the lesson cards. So when you learn, you can get it from your sideboard. So I wonder if we could see this be the way to turn on Ugin's Labyrinth, where you have this one mascot exhibition and your sideboard happens to be the perfect amount of mana and just colorless enough to work with Ugin's Labyrinth. Then you cast some random lesson card and just like snag this, Ugin's Labyrinth, have all the mana, use it to win the game. So I think the card is kind of ridiculous. In Commander, I think pretty much any colorless deck is going to take advantage of this card. Colorless decks in Commander are kind of weird, right? Because you already are going to be playing a ton of these colorless utility lands. Ugin's Labyrinth fits right in. If you have something to exile, that's amazing. If you don't have something to exile, it's just another waste essentially, and it's perfectly fine. So Ugin's Labyrinth, this card legitimately scares me. Like Flare, not every deck can play it, because you do need these expensive colorless things to turn it on. But in the decks that can turn it on, I feel like this card is borderline broken, and I would not be surprised when we're looking back on this set in like 6 months, a year, if this is a card we're like, why did they print this? This card's busted, it's gotta be bad. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but anytime I see a land that taps for 2 mana, it straight up scares me. So this card, we'll see how it shakes out, but it should be really good. Next up, we got to call back to one of my all-time favorite enchantments in Chthonian Nightmare. So a 2-mana enchantment, when ETBs you get 3 energy, and then you can pay X energy, sack a creature, return it to your hand, and then return target creature with mana value X from your graveyard to the battlefield. Only do it as a sorcery. If any of this looks familiar, it's essentially an energy version of Recurring Nightmare. And Recurring Nightmare is such a cool, fun card. Being able to just repeatedly sack stuff, looping reanimation from your graveyard, it's so much value. The question is, how big of a deal is this energy cost? And I think the answer is, it's pretty big. I was trying to think about what I would do with this card right now, and I guess you can try to like loop Rogue Refiner, sort of, but it only makes 2 energy and you need 3 because it costs 3 mana. Aethertide Whale's a 6-drop that makes 6 energy when it ETBs, so you could try to like loop that, but I don't know what that's really doing for you. Whirler Virtuoso, like, the problem with this card is not that the card is bad, it's that we don't have enough good energy cards to make it work. So I think this is a wait and see card. We know that energy is one of the themes from the set, and once we see the rest of the cards from Modern Horizons 3, this card might be legitimately busted. Like, the card is strong. Recurring Nightmare is a broken card, like a bannably broken card. So if there's enough energy to actually make this work like Recurring Nightmare, it's gonna be really, really good. One disappointing part about this card, and I guess this will probably change too once we get the commander decks from Modern Horizons 3, but we just got these sweet energy commanders in the Fallout set, but the problem is they're all in the Jeskai colors, so you can't even play Chthonian Nightmare in those decks. So I think this is a card that's just like incomplete. I guess some people play Atraxa Energy. It would work well in Atraxa Energy in Commander, but for now I think the grade on this one's basically incomplete. We can't really know how good this card will be or even what we're gonna do with it until we see the rest of Modern Horizons 3. If it's really easy to make energy and we get a bunch of good energy cards, I could certainly see this being a build around staple style card for a specific deck because it's a lot like Recurring Nightmare. On the other hand, if the energy producers are roughly where they are now in terms of power level, I think this is a powerful card, but one that doesn't have a home. But it's certainly one to keep an eye out for the long term, because the more energy production we get, the more this becomes a real Recurring Nightmare, and once this is a real Recurring Nightmare, it is a really good card. We also got Wight of the Reliquary, a 2-mana 2/2 zombie knight. It's a Golgari card. It gets +1/+1 for each creature in your graveyard, and then you can tap it and sack another creature to search your library for a land card, not even a basic land, any land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So Wight of the Reliquary, call back to Knight of the Reliquary. It's the zombie version. I do love these references and callbacks. Like, I love Modern Horizons sets so much. So I do like the reference here. Also works a little bit like Fiend Artisan, is this 2-drop that gets big based on the number of creatures in your graveyard. And we've seen Fiend Artisan decks where this can pretty quickly be like a 2-mana 8/8 or 10/10 or something. So it is going to get big really quick. I also like that they gave Vigilance to Wight of the Reliquary. So if you get it big, you can attack with it and still activate its ability. The question is, what do we do with this card? So you can sack a creature to put a land from your library into play tapped. In Modern, I guess you're getting Cabal Coffers. You could try to assemble Tron, even though it's awkward that Wight of the Reliquary is a 2-color card. You can get like Cavern of Souls, maybe a bounce land for value. So there are possibilities for this card. I think this card goes way up in value in Commander. In Commander, being able to tutor non-basic lands, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the strongest things you can do in the format. You can get Field of the Dead, instant speed, for sacking a creature. You can get Glacial Chasm if you're being attacked for lethal to fizzle it. You can get Nykthos and Gaia's Cradle and Thespian Stage. So I think, assuming you're a deck that has enough bodies to sacrifice, I think this card becomes very, very exciting in Commander in specific. I do wonder, though, like in Legacy, Elvish Reclaimer sees a lot of play in Dark Depths Thespian Stage. You're trying to assemble this land combo, right? And Elvish Reclaimer just lets you tutor up the lands you need. I wonder if Wight of the Reliquary could do something kind of similar. You do need bodies to sacrifice, but still, it's kind of a better version of Elvish Reclaimer in some ways if you're trying to tutor out these specific decks. So if you have a land-based combo, and you have enough creatures to keep sacrificing, it's certainly worth keeping in mind. I really hope we see Veteran Explorer in this set. Veteran Explorer was the first thing I thought of when I saw this card. Veteran Explorer, a staple in Legacy Nickfit. This 1-mana 1/1 that when it dies, each player gets to search for 2 basics. It works so well with Wight of the Reliquary. You can play Explorer on turn 1, turn 2 get down Wight of the Reliquary, next turn sack it, get 2 basics from Veteran Explorer, and your best land with Wight of the Reliquary. That's a ridiculous ramp start. So, seems good in like Nickfit in Legacy. Maybe there's some landy version of Nickfit that can play it. It's also a zombie, so if you're looking for bodies to sacrifice, Gravecrawler, really good at being sacrificed. I don't know what Zombies is really doing with the lands they tutor up. There's no super cool zombie lands, but still, like, seems cool there. There's even an infinite combo with this card, with Retreat to Coralhelm and Bloodghast. So Retreat to Coralhelm, when a land ETBs, you can tap or untap target creature. Bloodghast comes back from your graveyard when a land ETBs. So the idea is, you Wight of the Reliquary, sack the Bloodghast, tutor out a land, the land comes into play, you get back the Bloodghast, Retreat to Coralhelm, untaps the Wight of the Reliquary, then you do it again and again. You'll ramp every single land out of your deck, so you're gonna have an absurd amount of mana. If you throw in like an Amulet or a Splunking, they're all gonna be untapped, which is even wilder. So you get all your lands out of your deck, plus you're getting a huge amount of landfall triggers. So you have a Lotus Cobra, a Scoot Swarm, you just really pop off. So this probably not gonna be competitive. You do need 3 different pieces to go infinite, but seems like a fun against the odds deck or something cool for a commander deck at least. Also, cute with Colony Garden, a land that makes tokens, and you sack the tokens to get another land. There's a whole bunch of sweet synergies here. I think this card in Commander, 2 potential homes. So first, seems good in land sack style decks. If you're playing Lord Windgrace or the Gitrog monster or Zamon and Dina, seems to fit in right there. Plus it seems good in sacrifice style decks like Smeagol's, kind of like a landfall-y version of a sack deck. So Wight fits in either of those styles of play. And really, it might be better than that. I just think that tutoring up non-basic lands is so good in Commander. This might just be worth playing in other decks too, just to get that Glacial Chasm or the Field of the Dead or whatever busted non-basic land you need for a specific situation. So it might be even better than I'm giving it credit for. So Wight of the Reliquary seems like a cool build around for Modern. We'll have to see what support pieces there are, but it gets really big if you can get creatures in your graveyard. Being able to tutor up lands by sacking creatures, which then grows the right, seems really powerful. Worst case, easy Commander staple. One of my favorite parts of Modern Horizon sets is all the super nostalgic callbacks and seeing like iconic creatures in new form. And it seems like what we're getting with MH3 is iconic creatures as Eldrazi. So here we see Nulldrifter in Spawn Gang Commander. So these cards, Nulldrifter, obviously referencing Mulldrifter, Spawn Gang Commander, referencing Siege Gang Commander. These cards, I'm not sure how good they are, but they're so flavorful. So Nulldrifter, 7 mana 4/4. When you cast it, you draw 2 cards. It is flying an Annihilator 1, and just like Mulldrifter, you can evoke it for 3. So if you're spending 7 mana on this, you could be casting something more busted, I think. On the other hand, the Evoke of 3 is exactly like Mulldrifter, so maybe you can do the same trick as Mulldrifter, where you like evoke it and then ephemerate it to get it to stay around. The one downside with this plan is Nulldrifter triggers when it's cast. Mulldrifter is an ETB trigger, so if you ephemerate the Mulldrifter, you're gonna draw cards again. You won't do that with Nulldrifter. The upside though is you get to keep behind this really big annihilating flyer that seems like a pretty reasonable threat. I can imagine a world where you like turn 1 Ugin's Labyrinth to get some extra mana. Maybe by turn 3 you're able to evoke the Nulldrifter, draw some cards, ephemerate it, and then you're attacking on turn 4 to be able to take and start shooting down your opponent's lands with the Annihilator trigger. Also does work with Ugin's Labyrinth, which is gonna matter, I think, in Modern because that card's so strong. Spawn Gate Commander, on the other hand, it's just an uncommon. This card I mostly just like for flavor. I don't think it's gonna see constructed play. 5 mana 2/2 makes 3/0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawns when you cast it, and then you pay 2 mana to sack an Eldrazi spawn to deal 2 damage to any target, just like Siege Gang Commander. It's kind of like Emrakul's Hatcher, which never saw competitive play. It's an upgraded Hatcher. The biggest upside of it is, well, it adds a lot of bodies to the battlefield, but it does ramp you a bunch. If you play this for 5 mana, the 3 Eldrazi spawns can each make a mana, so the next turn you'll get up to like 9 mana. So it's probably just a limited thing, but either way, the flavor on these cards is just so cool. Like, who was expecting Eldrazi Mulldrifter, Eldrazi Siege Gang Commander? The flavor is so good that I really don't even care if the cards see play. I just absolutely love the designs on these cards. We also got a scary mythic Eldrazi Dragon in Herigast Erupting Nullkite. So 9 mana, 6/6. It has a merge of 6 red. So if you don't remember a merge, you can cast the spell by sacrificing a creature and paying the emerge cost reduced by the creature's mana value. So what this means for Herigast is, let's say you sack a 6 mana creature, you can cast this for just double red mana. So it could be a double red mana 6/6 flyer if you have something big to sacrifice. When you cast it, you can exile your hand and draw 3 cards, and it has flying, and most excitingly, each creature spell you cast has a merge with its emerge cost equal to its mana cost. And I think that ability can lead to some pretty spectacular turns. So just how good Herigast is, I'm actually not sure. Back in its day, Elder Deep Fiend, Distended Mindbender, these big emerge creatures, they were actually pretty good. There was a time when these cards actually even saw Modern play. This was pre-Modern Horizons Modern, which is kind of relevant. The power level's just so much higher now that it's been a long time since I've seen Elder Deep Fiend or Distended Mindbender, but we've seen in the past cards like this could see play. The thing that's intriguing about Herigast is its combo potential. So what I imagine you do with this card is you get it on the battlefield, and then you try to chain together big colorless things that draw you cards and hopefully maybe leave behind value when they die. So like, let's say you get down Herigast, you can cast a Mulldrifter, sacrificing your creature, draw 2 cards, and then you sack another Nulldrifter, sacking the first Nulldrifter to draw some more cards. Maybe you sack a Worm Coil that leaves behind some tokens. You can like Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, really cheap to draw 4 cards, and then you sacrifice that to the Nulldrifter to draw more cards. So there's this weird like draw your deck combo-y type loop. Kozilek the Great Distortion I put on here because I wanted to mention that emerge does require you to pay for colored costs. So Kozilek the Great Distortion, you can never emerge it for free. You're always going to have to pay that 2 real colorless mana, but you can emerge away the other 8 mana. So keep that in mind. It works with most Eldrazi, but not all of the Eldrazi. The Eldrazi that actually require colorless mana don't work nearly as well with Herigast. Even outside of the Eldrazi plan, it could be sweet with other cost reduction creatures like Scion of Dracos, 12 mana, but you're usually casting it for what, 2 mana, maybe as early as turn 2. So you can like Scion of Draco, and then turn 3 you can just sacrifice it and get down to Herigast and draw some cards and start doing the emerge thing. In Commander, probably mostly going to be, well, either an Eldrazi card, that's the obvious one, but outside of Eldrazi, seems really cool in Dragons. It is a dragon, works really well with like Miram or the Dragon, where you have these really expensive creatures, but thanks to emerge you can cast them on the cheap, and if your commander is Miram, you're going to be getting token copies of each of them, which is kind of ridiculous. So you can like emerge off the copy and keep the original, or emerge off the original, keep the copy, and every time you do that, just make a bigger and bigger board. So it seems absolutely absurd there. As a commander, I'm actually kind of meh on it. Like, because its emerge cost is red, you'd be a mono red deck, which kind of reduces the places you could play. If it was 5 color, it'd be kind of spicy. But as a mono red commander, not the most exciting commander, but a nice addition in the 99 of Eldrazi decks and certain dragon decks. We also got another new dog in Phelia Exuberant Shepherd, which I don't know that much about dog breeds, but I don't think that's a shepherd. At least the main set version looks a lot more like a corgi to me, but I don't know. Let me know in the comments. Is that actually a shepherd, or is the dog type wrong? The card itself, I love the flavor of this card. 2 mana 2/2, legendary dog. It has flash. When it attacks, exile up to one other target non-land permanent. At the beginning of the next end step, the card comes back into play under its owner's control. If it entered under your control, you put a counter on Phelia. So the flavor of this card is essentially playing fetch with your dog. You attack and you blink something and Phelia fetches it and maybe grows if it was your thing that it was blinked. As far as how good this card is, I'm actually not sure. So on one hand, I think this card can be pretty powerful used aggressively. So one thing this can do is remove a blocker from play. So maybe you're playing some sort of white weenie deck, some sort of Taxes deck. It's even better if you got Delny to double up its trigger, but you attack with Phelia, get a blocker out of the way, get in for a bunch of damage. Sure, the blocker is going to come back on the end step, but then you do it again the next turn. If you got Delny out, you can do it twice in a turn and get 2 blockers out of the way. So that's one possibility, and that's probably going to be the best use of this, is just trying to get blockers out of the way to aggro your opponent out of the game. The other possibility is trying to use it to blink your stuff for value. So this is another way you can blink a Solitude or a Grief or a Mulldrifter, or now a Nulldrifter too, I guess. But this can blink your own stuff for value. The only problem with that plan is that requires attacking with a 2/2 and not having it die in combat damage. Yes, you can blink once no matter what if you attack with it, but it's probably going to trade off pretty soon and you're not going to get that repeatable blink snowball value. So I think it's almost better used offensively than blinking your own stuff, although really in reality it'll probably be a mixture where in the early game you're clearing blockers so you can attack, and then eventually you blink your Solitude to get rid of something really important forever. So I think that's a powerful play pattern. Can also just kind of be an ambush viper. It is weird that its flash ability isn't really connected to its other ability. Its other ability is attack trigger, but if your opponent's attacking you with a Ragavan, you can just send Phelia in there with flash to get in front of the monkey, take down the Ragavan. So that's also a nice little upside. One thing I really like about this is it can exile any non-land permanent. We have a lot of blink effects that can blink other creatures, but blinking any non-land is a little bit rare. So sometimes you want to reset a Saga or blink a Portal to Phyrexia. Phelia gets the job done, and this becomes even more important in some commander decks. I played a Curse commander deck recently, and the problem with curses is they enchant a specific player, and once that player dies, your curses go away. So something like Phelia is a way that you can reset who your curses are on, which is pretty cute. So Phelia, I like the card. I think the flavor of the card is really good. I think it potentially has some constructed implications, although I would be surprised if it was a real constructed stable, but still, it's a super cute dog, so how can you be too upset even if it doesn't make it in Modern? Moving from the world of dogs, we head to the world of bears with Kudo, King Among Bears. Kind of a literal hate bear. So it's a 2 mana 2/2. It's a Celestial Legend, and it says other creatures have base power and toughness of 2/2 and are bears in addition to their other types. So this card I absolutely love. The art on this card is so funny. On one hand, you have this very regal, super huge, very kingly looking bear in the pack version, but then that side profile version, he looks like, I don't know, like a Yogi the Bear or something. Does not look like the same bear to me. But Kudo, it is a super sweet card. First off, it's good in basically any bear commander deck. Duskana wants all your things to be 2/2s to work with its ability. Kudo just makes everything 2/2s. Ayula also likes having everything be bears, and then you can grow your stuff as all your creatures enter the battlefield, so it works with Kudo's other ability of turning everything into bears. So really good in any sort of bear commander decks, either as your commander or in the 99 as something like Duskana. However, in Modern, I think this card might actually have uses. So turning everything into bears, I don't think that really has too many uses outside of janky against the odds things, but the big upside of this card is it makes everything into 2/2. So if your opponent has a Emrakul the Eon's Torn, or a massive Death Shadow, or a huge Archon of Cruelty, you can play a Kudo, and now your bears can trade with an Emrakul, or with the Death Shadow, or with the Archon of Cruelty, because it's going to become a 2/2. So this could potentially remove a ton of power off your opponent's side of the battlefield. So if your opponent's just about playing these massive creatures, this is actually kind of an intriguing hate card for just 2 mana. It also combos with Elishnorn, turn all your opponent's stuff into 2/2s, things, and then Elishnorn gives it all -2/-2 to just wipe out your opponent's board, which probably more of a commander thing than a competitive modern thing, but still pretty sweet. There's also a lot of effects that deal 2 damage to everything, or give everything -2/-2. So Kudo, you could like play it and then Cry of Canarium is a hard wrath, Pyroclasm is a hard wrath. Even better if you can Kudo and then get down an Anthem effect like Flowering of the White Tree to grow your creatures. Then you turn the Pyroclasm into a one-sided board wrath that just wipes away your opponent's board. Your creatures are going to survive thanks to the buff from the flowering. So there's some cool ways to build around this card. It also is just kind of good with tokens. Like, let's say you play a Spawn Gang commander that makes these 0/1 Eldrazi spawns. Not very good for attacking because they're 0 power, but if you have Kudo down, they're going to be 2/2s, which are actually kind of a reasonable threat. Your Spawn Gang commanders going to be adding a huge pile of power and toughness to the battlefield. Same with like Lingering Souls, anything that makes small tokens. It's also kind of a cool card with modular effects. So remember, Kudo sets the base power and toughness of the card to 2/2. Cards like Arcbound Ravager, Walking Ballista, their base power is actually 0/0. So you're actually growing them because the way they normally work is growing with the counters you put on them. So in some sort of modular deck, this is actually just like a huge boost of power to your creatures. So Kudo, I could see this being a sideboard card in Modern. Like, in the right matchup, if the matchup is about your opponent's just like, I'm going to beat you down with really big things, this is almost like a weird humility effect that's just going to make all your opponent's things much more manageable, much easier to deal with. If you're already playing a bunch of small creatures, then maybe your stuff's getting bigger, so that's the way you break this symmetry of it. So I could see it having a role in Modern. Worst case, super cool bear commander. We also got a new Goyf, a Nethergoyf, a 1-mana mythic. It's a lure Goyf. It says its power is equal to the number of card types among cards in your graveyard. Its toughness is equal to that number +1. And then it has escape of 3 and exile any number of other cards from your graveyard with 4 or more card types among them. And then you can cast it from your graveyard. So Nethergoyf, it is essentially a 1-mana black Tarmogoyf, but it's a Tarmogoyf that only cares about your graveyard. So you're not going to grow it based on what's in your opponent's graveyard. And then the Nether part, I think, is like a reference to Nether Spirit in the sense that it can be coming back from your graveyard. I don't know how often you're going to escape this. Like, in the late game, it's probably going to happen on occasion. But 3 mana and exiling 4 different card types not only is kind of a big ask, but that's removing a lot of card types from your graveyard potentially, which would then be shrinking your Nethergoyf, shrinking your Tarmogoyf. So the question is Nethergoyf good? And I think the answer is sort of. So as far as just adding a huge amount of power to the battlefield, this is going to be one of the best 1-drops of all time. Like, it's pretty easy in Modern to build a deck where you're like, turn 1, crack a fetch, Mishra's Bauble, grief you to make sure you don't have a removal spell, Nethergoyf, it's a 3/4 on turn 1. We've never had that before. We've never had a 1-drop that's adding 3 power to the battlefield, 4 power to the battlefield, and it goes up across the game. If you want to be playing like Dragon Rage Channelers or Stitcher Suppliers, a deck that's actually dedicated to filling your graveyard, not just like, I'm going to crack a Bauble and crack a fetch and play normal Magic, this can easily be a 1-drop that's 5 power, 6 power, so it is really big. It is one of the biggest early game 1-drops that we've ever seen, maybe the biggest early game 1-drop that we've ever seen. And then you do have the upside that if you're a dedicated graveyard deck, you can potentially get it back from your graveyard a couple times. It is probably going to shrink your Goyf, but still being able to get it back for 3 mana, not super exciting, but still it is recurable in that sense, which is a big upside as well. So that part of Nethergoyf is really, really good. On the other hand, it's kind of just a big 1-drop, right? It's not going to snowball to a victory like Ragavan or like Esper Sentinel. It's not going to let you filter through your deck at lightning speed like Dragon Rage Channelers. So in some ways, compared to the 1-drops of last Modern Horizons, Nethergoyf actually feels kind of tame. Not that it's a bad card. I'm not saying it's a bad card. Like, there has to be a use of like a Wild Nikado type card, right? It's just like, I'm a 1-drop and I add a lot of power to the battlefield. If you don't kill me, I'm going to hit you for a lot early in the game. That's what Nethergoyf offers. It offers a sort of recurable Wild Nikado style creature, and I think there's still a place for that in the game, but I don't think this is the new Ragavan or the new Esper Sentinel or Dragon Rage Channeler. I think it ranks a little bit behind there because, like I said, it is just a big creature. You can still kill it with removal. Exile removal like Solitude gets rid of it forever. The escape stuff doesn't matter, and it only triggers on your graveyard. So Nethergoyf, I like it. I do expect this one to see Modern play. The design, the callback is really, really cool, but I do think it's like a tier below the Ragavan level of 1-drop. So I'm not sure it's a format defining card. It's more probably like in the right deck, this is a 1-drop that can add a lot of power, and in that deck, it's going to be really, really good. We also got a pretty intriguing new hate card, a new moon card even, in Winter Moon. So Winter Moon, 2-mana artifact, it says players can't untap more than one non-basic land during their untap step. So this is a card that calls back to the basics. Non-basic lands just straight up don't untap during their controller's untap phases. Calls back to Winter Orb with the untapping 1 land per turn. It's kind of like a kinder version of Back to Basics mixed with a kinder version of Winter Orb. The question is it still good enough? Like, is this impactful enough to see competitive play? So in Modern, it's competing with Blood Moon. That's kind of the big competition here. Winter Moon, it's not as good at janking people out of the game as Blood Moon. Your opponent is still likely going to be able to function. I mean, they're still definitely going to be able to function to some extent, right? Like, worst case, if your opponent's deck is all non-basic lands, they get to untap 1 land each turn and potentially make a land drop each turn. So you're putting your opponent down to like 1 or 2 mana a turn, rather than Blood Moon kind of maybe just totally shutting off some decks and they can't do anything. So it's not as strong a fate as something like Blood Moon, but it is cheaper, and it doesn't mess up your own mana base as much as Blood Moon does, assuming that you build around it. I think the biggest drawback I see with Winter Moon is it doesn't interact well with fetches. Part of the power of Blood Moon is you play it, you mess up the lands that your opponent has, and they can't just fetch their way out of it. What I think is going to happen a lot with Winter Moon is you play it, and you get a couple non-basics on the battlefield tapped down, but then your opponent plays a fetch land, and they're like, well, there's a Winter Moon, so I guess I'm fetching out my basics, and then the basics function normally. So I think it's going to be hard to turn this into a hard lock piece. It's more like a tempo piece, I think. We're going to be able to slow down a deck, and maybe that's enough. It is just 2 mana, so I think there is potential here. If you think about like Tron or Amulet Titan decks, or even just Domain decks that are playing almost all non-basics, if you drop a Winter Moon on turn 2, you're really going to slow down your opponent's game plan. Like, yes, eventually they will be able to untap their lands and play Magic. Yes, they'll find some fetches to maybe get their few basics, but you are greatly going to slow down your opponent's game plan. So if you can back this up by being aggressive yourself, like you're a Merfolk deck, you're a human deck, some sort of monocolor aggro deck, then I think this is actually a pretty powerful effect. Like, you're not going to splash red in humans to be able to play a Blood Moon, or same with Merfolk. You're not going to splash red in your Merfolk deck for Blood Moon, but you can just kind of free roll this, and yeah, it's not going to stop your opponent from playing Magic forever, but it might stop them from playing Magic long enough for you to beat them down with your creatures and pick up the win. The other interesting plays for this is Prowess style decks. In Prowess style decks, as crazy as this sounds, Blood Moon might just be a little bit too expensive. Like, when you mostly care about casting non-creatures to trigger all your Prowess stuff, 2 mana versus 3 mana is a huge, huge deal. So maybe this is actually better than Blood Moon in Prowess style decks just because it's less mana, even though it's less hateful as well. The scariest thing about this card, and this is where I need your opinion, if you're watching this video, let me know in the comments, is this card fair game in Commander? That is the question. Is this a card that is shadow banned, like Armageddon and other mass land destruction, that you just really can't play in Plate Company because people are going to get upset? Or is this a soft enough form of land hate that you're allowed to play this? Because it only messes with non-basics, and it doesn't even shut them down completely. It doesn't blow them up. It just, you only get to untap 1 each turn, so it slows you down a little bit. So that's the big question. If this card is fair game in Commander, I think it's strong in basically any monocolor deck. I would be incredibly afraid of this card. The way I build Commander decks, I got like 5 basics, I got like 3 basics, sometimes I got even less than that. Like, I play a lot of non-basic lands, not very many basic lands. If you drop this against me on turn 2, it is going to make my game plan way slower. Like, yes, I still kind of get to play Magic, but I'm definitely not going to do what my deck's trying to do. So if this card is socially acceptable in Commander, I think there's an argument for dropping it in essentially any monocolor deck. Krenko or Marwyn or Gayata or Urza or Kirk, doesn't even matter. Drop it in there. It's going to be really powerful. The question is, does it make your friends hate you too much for you to be able to do that? If the answer is yes, then I guess you probably don't play it, because friends are probably better than keeping your opponent's non-basics tapped down. But if everyone's cool with it, I think this card is actually legit good, probably very good in CDH as well as in other stack speeds. So Modern, I think the card has uses. It's not Blood Moon, It's not Winter Orb, but that's probably a good thing. Those cards are super brutal, but I do think in the right deck, some sort of monocolor aggro deck, this looks like a pretty good sideboard option that can hopefully just slow down the greedy decks long enough for you to tempo in for the win. And in Commander, this card is an absolute house if you're allowed to play it, which, I don't know. Let me know what you think. Are you going to jam this in Commander? Very curious what y'all are thinking on that one. As far as reprints, we have a few exciting ones that are new to Modern for the first time. So first off, Meltdown. So 1 red and X, destroy each artifact with mana value X or less, originally from Urza Saga. The card does see a bit of legacy play, and I think it can see sideboard play in Modern as well. So its job is primarily sniping Karnstructs. So Urza Saga makes a ton of these 0 mana Karnstructs that are super big. Now we have Simulacrum Synthesizer, and I think Wizards probably did this on purpose. Wizards deserves more credit than we give them sometime for how they design sets. So they printed Simulacrum Synthesizer, which is one of the strongest cards from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, has made Affinity a thing again in Modern, and has led to games where on turn 3 your opponent has like, I don't even know, 4 10-10 constructs or something absurd. Now they give us Meltdown is a really nice answer to this. So I think that Meltdown will see sideboard play in Modern, is an answer to construct tokens, also good against like Arcbound Ravager style decks, Hardened Scales style decks. It's essentially like a Vandal Blast, but you can cast it for 1 mana and get all the constructs. So I think that by itself makes this card a sideboard all-star if these artifact decks are a big part of the meta. Speaking of artifact decks, don't worry, they're getting a little bit of help too in Kappa Cannoneer. So Kappa Cannoneer is a 6 mana 4/4 Turtle Warrior artifact creature. It has Improvise, so we can tap artifacts to help pay for it, so you can get it down to 1 mana. It has Ward 4, so kind of almost impossible to kill. And when it or another artifact ETB is under control, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it can't be blocked this turn. So this is a card originally from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty Commander, and I'm pretty sure Gavin Verhey recently did a video talking about Ward, and talked about this card in specific, and said it was kind of like an accidental legacy staple. They didn't mean for it to be a legacy card, but it turned out to be really good in legacy. And I think this card will see play in Modern for sure in the revitalized Affinity deck. So this is another card that works really well with Simulacrum Synthesizer. Doesn't technically have Affinity, but Improvise kind of close enough. You can tap your random, Memnites and Ornithopters to cast it on the cheap. It's expensive enough to trigger Synthesizer, and it gives you this almost impossible to kill with target removal, often unblockable threat. So I think this joins the package of Thought Monitor, Sojourner's Companion, and powers up Simulacrum Synthesizer a little bit more. So I guess it's a good thing they printed Meltdown, because we're probably going to need an answer to these artifacts. Our final reprint is a card that has a very special place in my heart, in Orim's Chant. So Orim's Chant, I'm so excited this card's coming to Modern and a Magic Arena for the first time. Definitely going to have to teach Zoomers about this. I'm going to tell you a story about this card in just a minute, but it's a 1 white mana instant. It has Kicker of another white mana. It says target player can't cast spells this turn. If the spell was kicked, creatures can't attack this turn. So this card was originally from Plane Shift, and it's essentially a silence mixed with like a preemptive fog. You pay 1 mana, your opponent can't cast spells for the turn. You kick it for another mana, they can't attack for the turn, which is essentially like fogging the damage. So why am I so excited about this silence plus fog card? And the answer is, if you go back in the history of Magic, like 15, wow, maybe more than, maybe 20 years now, a long time ago now, but there was a deck in Extended that was really good, that was Scepter Chant. And the goal of the deck was to put an Orim's Chant under an Isochron Scepter. Isochron Scepter lets you imprint an instant from your hand with mana value 2 or less, like Orim's Chant, and then for 2, you can copy it without paying its mana cost. So the idea is, you put Orim's Chant under the Isochron Scepter, and then on your opponent's upkeep every turn, you Isochron Scepter, pay 1 mana for the kicker on Orim's Chant, and for that turn, your opponent can't cast spells, and they can't attack you. And then the next turn, you do it again, and 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 you essentially lock your opponent out of casting anything but instants in response to you activating your Isochron Scepter, or attacking you for the rest of the game. So back when I was learning Magic, and this is like early 2000s, I built this super janky original Mirrored in Block charge counter deck. That was the first deck I ever built. In the deck, it was really bad. I was trying to like kill people with Eon Storm and playing all these horrible 8 drops. It was a really, really janky deck. But that was my deck, and that was the deck I was playing. I had this friend who was a much more competitive player, had been playing longer than I was, and he had a very tuned extended Scepter Chant deck. So we were playing these casual games, and I was running out my charge counter deck, and here's my buddy that's just Scepter Chanting me every game. It wasn't even a fair fight. I was just getting absolutely murdered, and I got so frustrated. I didn't quit Magic, but I was like flipping the table frustrated, and eventually I went and dug through a big pile of cards that we had laying around, and I found the card Shatter, which is just blow up an artifact to instant speed. So I finally got that in my deck. My buddy goes to do the Scepter Orm's Chant lock. I get him with the Shatter. I win the game with my janky artifacts, so now I've won 1 out of 30 games or something, and that was a moment that really got me addicted to Magic. The problem solving of it. My opponent's doing this miserable lock me out of the game thing, but I found a way to actually defeat that. So I have a very special place in my heart for Scepter Chant decks, even though they're absolutely miserable, and I am unreasonably excited to be able to teach a new generation of Magic players about what it's like to get liked with Orim's Chant and Isochron Scepter, probably in Timeless on Magic Arena, maybe in Modern as well. I will say the plan's not going to be nearly as good as they used to be because the card pool has changed a lot, right? Now we have cards like Boseiju everywhere, Leyline Binding everywhere, Force of Vigor, and the way you interact with the Scepter Chant lock is you just blow up the Scepter with the activation on the stack essentially, and the whole plan falls apart. So I don't think it's nearly as good as it used to be. A lot of decks are going to have an answer for it, but I'm still really hyped to see Scepter Chant actually being a thing again. We also got Sylvan Safe Creature, which also sees some legacy play. 1 mana 1/1 human wizard, sack land to give target creature you control Shroud until end of turn. So this is essentially a way to protect your combo pieces. Originally an invitational card from Judgment, new to Magic Arena, new to Modern for the first time. This is kind of like a green Mother of Runes almost that makes you sacrifice a land. Its primary home in Legacy is in Dark Depths decks, where you already get a bunch of lands on the battlefield. You can life from them back anyway, so sacking a land isn't a big deal. And you make your huge Merit Lash, and this just makes sure that you can protect it. If your opponent tries to Sword Sit or something, you sack a land, give your Merit Lash Shroud, you kill your opponent in one big attack. And I could see Sylvan Safekeeper maybe doing something similar in Modern. If you're playing some sort of creature-y combo deck, like Yogg combo, and you're like, I just need my Yogg to live and I win the game. Or maybe Devoted Druid combo, or even like Amulet Titan where you're just like, I need my Titan, I'm going to win the game. Sylvan Safekeeper is kind of an interesting option. Being able to just sack a land to make sure your thing isn't going to die to targeted removal. It's pretty powerful, especially if you're winning the game that turn. Obviously, you don't want to do it all the time because you're going to lose a lot of resources and probably lose the game. But if you're going to win the game right away, it's kind of like Pact of Negation in that sense, where sure, I got to pay this mana for Pact next turn, but if I'm going to combo kill you right now, I never get to my next upkeep, so I don't got to worry about it. Sylvan Safekeeper is kind of like that. If you can set up a creature combo and use Sylvan Safekeeper to protect it, what do you care if you go down on land? The game's going to end anyway. The downside is it does give Shroud, so keep that in mind. It's like pretty actively bad in a deck like Infect, let's say, where you want to be able to target your Glistener Elf with your pump spells. Shroud means no one can target your things. You can't do it, your opponent can't do it. So there's certain homes where it's not going to be as good, but I do think Sylvan Safekeeper will have a role in Modern in specific creature combo decks as a way to protect your creatures. It also has the hidden mode of just letting you sack all your lands. Not usually relevant, but we've seen some land combo decks that like lands in the graveyard. So this is also just like sack your entire mana base if you want to. So if that's beneficial, keep that in mind as well. We also got 2 lower rarity cards that I gotta mention, including Urza's Cave, which I sneakily think might be the strongest commander card that we talk about today. So it's a land, it makes a colorless mana, it's Urza's and also a cave, so Tron synergies, cave synergies. Most importantly, pay 3, tap sack it, search your library for a land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Notice the card is missing the word basic. This gets any non-basic land, which is incredibly strong. I think this is a new commander staple. Like, I would literally play this card in, I believe, every single deck. I'm trying to think of an example where I wouldn't play it, but I think from monocolored to 5-colored, I probably play this in every deck. Maybe 5-color is the least likely because you don't have enough room for utility lands sometimes. But the power of being able to tutor up non-basic lands at instant speed is incredibly high. Cards like this are the reason we just banned Glacial Chasm and Field of the Dead on Commander Clash, because Wizards keeps printing more and more of these non-basic land tutors, and when you can consistently find Glacial Chasm on the turn that your opponent's attacking you for lethal, or consistently find Field of the Dead and then find the Vesuva to copy it and then the Thespian Sage to copy it, it gets out of control really, really quickly. This card is just great in Commander. Even if you're not playing with Glacial Chasm or Field of the Dead, it's going to fix your mana, it's going to get your best utility land, it's going to get Vesuvas and Thespian Stages to get your opponent's best utility lands, it gets Nykthos, it gets Coffers, it gets Strip Mine. Like, this card's absurd. The card is absolutely absurd. Like, it's wild. Like, Wizards normally doesn't print non-basic land ramp like this, and this is non-basic land ramp that's also just your land drop, and then you can activate it at instant speed later. So I think this is the best Commander card that we've talked about today, and it's not even close. And it could have some modern playability, probably tutoring out Tron, but I don't know, could also maybe be getting like Dark Depths, Thespian Stage combos in Legacy. So I think this card actually has a lot of uses. The fact that it gets any land is just ridiculously powerful. This card is so incredibly good. We also got Null Elemental Blast that I gotta give a shout out to just because the design's really cool. So 1 colorless mana instant, choose one, counter target multicolor spell or destroy target multicolor permanent. So this is the colorless Eldrazi version of Red Elemental Blast, Blue Elemental Blast, Null Elemental Blast. I guess the opposite of colorless is multicolor, so I guess the flavor actually kind of works. I don't know how good this card is. Colorless decks are kind of hard up for removal, but only getting multicolor stuff is pretty narrow. I was looking through things that see play in Modern, and the list of multicolor cards that are like in the top 50 cards in the format, not super high. It's like Atraxa, Teferi, Leyline of the Guild Pact. Maybe that's enough, but I think this card, we've seen Red Elemental Blast, Blue Elemental Blast be staples in the past, and this is a card that it's costed in a way where it's very playable. Not every meta is going to need it, but when there are good multicolor things going on, I think this is a staple level card for a deck that has colorless mana. Plus, it's just another super cool callback and a really cool design. So well done on that one, Wizards. Finally today, Modern Horizons 3 has a bunch of Commander decks for some reason. No one knows why. Actually, we all know why. WotC gotta get that money from those Commander players. But they did preview 4 Commander cards today from the Commander decks. These cards, as far as we know, are not Modern legal. I haven't heard any announcement about them being Modern legal. They're just Commander legal. But Tomer did a whole video about these on the Commander YouTube. So I'm not gonna get into the cards. Go over watch Tomer's video as he talks about the very odd Commander Modern Horizons cards. Anyway, everyone, that brings us to the end of our daily Modern Horizons 3 spoilers for today. And I gotta say, this was already the set I was most hyped about for the year. I love Modern Horizons. Like, I hate Modern Horizons too, but I also love Modern Horizons. We got one of those love-hate things going on, but I am unreasonably excited for this set, and today's spoilers put it through the roof. I'm even more excited now. So we'll pick spoiler season back up in 3 weeks on May 21st. Until then, let me know in the comments, what's your hype level for this set? Which of today's cards are you most excited about? What about that new Winter Moon? Is that safe for Commander? So let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more Magic? Well, you can check out the video about the worst Magic sets of all time here, or maybe last week's budget Magic, where we kind of broke standard on a $30 budget.